Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to go through Peter Hahn's dynamic sketching class, what we did in that class, kind of a review of the whole thing if you're interested in taking it, so I hope that this is going to be helpful. And to give you the too long, didn't read version, let's go ahead and take the class. Now, as far as what we actually did, I'm going to go through my sketchbook here and kind of break down the lessons in each class really quickly, the sketches that I did, how I fared. And just to give you some quick context, I've been studying art mainly through the Watts Atelier online program, but I feel like the Watts program was missing this kind of sketching without really being concerned about making mistakes. You know, sketching with this tool, you see if you can see it, like this is a 0.3, I think it's called a felt tip pencil, and when you draw with this, with no underlay, and you just get to drawing, it makes you a lot quicker, it gives you a lot of speed, and you start to be able to play with imagination a little bit because you start to make mistakes. And once you commit to the line, you have to make it work. We'll get into that later, but for now, you know, just kind of looking at week one, you know, we started with kind of doing this line over line over line just to practice accuracy with the pencil and being able to, you know, just really get beautiful lines if you so choose. So you start with kind of these, you know, short lines, longer, and as you can see, you start kind of well, but you start to get some sort of fraying, and ideally through practice, this starts to become less of an issue. You know, you've got these wavy lines, you start to play around with random shapes, and then you get into circles. So with the circles, the idea was you get the arm to move, and then you commit, and you start to get, and you know, you start to draw the circle in, and as much as possible, you want to start to diminish these, and you start to move. As you warm up your hand, you start to move in a way that gives you kind of this graceful circle that fits in a box, fits in a square, I want to say. You know, again, this is one of those things where it trains your hand for accuracy. Then we get into the same idea with ovals. Then we get into these forms of boxes and playing around with these forms, understand how they move in space, the cube and the idea of overlaps, the idea of strengthening the lines that are at the front, give them more pop. And then as you recede to the back, you start to have thinner lines, creating that push and pull effect. The next exercise here was really interesting and actually really useful. I'd like to do more of it, which is the idea of adding and subtracting forms. You know, if you can see here, you can kind of see my through lines where I start with this kind of cube, and then you just play around and think to yourself, okay, what if I add another square form or cube form and then cut into it, right? So here, for example, I think this is a great example here. I have this already established. I extend it with this form. I start to cut into that cube to try to envision what that would look like. You just kind of play with the different forms like they're Lego pieces. And this is really useful so that you can start to really understand how to rotate them in space. And that really unlocks imagination and imaginative play. Again, more of the same exercise over here, and you can see in my through lines, I'm starting to think about perspective, how things fit with each other. So you're constantly adding or subtracting. Then we come to this exercise. This was by far the toughest exercise for me in the class, and just something that I don't naturally understand, and I'm really glad Peter included it. You know, these kind of look like the add and subtract exercise that we had earlier, but this is different because you start by drawing the cube, and then you try to envision what this other cube would look like if it was kind of smushed into it, or smushed is the wrong word, more like if it was kind of, if it went through it, right? So you can see what I mean clearly here visually. Like, what if this cube was actually inside? What if this cube was actually inside of this cube? Okay, so it's fairly easy to do it with cubes on cubes, which are parallel to each other. But then it starts to get confusing when you've got different angles, you've got different sorts of insertions. Still kind of manageable, cube on cube. You can start to envision it. But then it starts to get really confusing when you start to play with different forms with each other. Particularly the sphere here over on here, you've got the curvature of the sphere itself to take into account, because essentially this is just infinite 360 degrees of circles, right? Of angles and curves. There's a lot more complex examples in this that the exercise required us to do, but it was so weak for me that even getting something simple like this was really helpful. And this is one of those where Peter recommends that you use a reference at the beginning, because you have to have a visual. Like, you can sort of imagine what it looks like, but a lot of times it's actually counterintuitive. I'm gonna put a link below that takes you to this website that has these different references, and it's actually one of those where you can play around with it. So you can have a block and then a sphere, and then kind of move the sphere back and forth. It's not infinite in the way that it works. It does have a lot of limitations, but it's super useful. So that was week 1. Now we get into week 2, which is kind of the start of what dynamic sketching actually is as a method to retain information. Because at the end of the day, that's what dynamic sketching is about. It's not about producing beautiful drawings, although you can with that method, but in reality, it's a method that you can use to study things quickly and ingest visual information really quickly. Because if you spend, hours trying to copy a reference, you train a lot of things in that form. I'm not discounting it, but this is about quick retention. Let's say you want to study something like composition. If you spend a long time trying to copy that drawing, you're not going to get a lot of composition study. But if you can sketch quickly and look for the big basic shapes of that composition, then you can start retaining information, retaining shapes, retaining just the basic forms that you need to create that silhouette or that shape or that type or that animal or that person. You work with that and you start to have this working memory in your head that you can play around with. So anyways, first we started to work with patterns, and here you see me studying different patterns and the idea of value moving across. So here you see me kind of working through different references. So here I was trying to design hair from imagination, and here I was looking at different references, trying to understand how to use hatching to get those across. And I'm not someone who practiced hatching or inking a lot, so this is kind of my first time. Well, I don't want to say my first time, but I'm a beginner when it comes to hatching. But I found that my Watts training helped me kind of understand it a lot faster. Then we go into actually applying the hatching into organic forms, and you can see like very scratchy lines. I'm still trying to understand how to use this tool in a clean way, how to hatch, how to make it so that it's going around the form. So here you see I'm going actually in the direction that doesn't quite explain it. I'm trying to explain this kind of curvature where it would be more natural to go with this to keep the flow lines clean and the design clean. Here I start to inject more texture, like, let's say dinosaur scales or feathers or whatever. I think I took this from the cobblestones reference, and I started to kind of play around with it and see what I can do. So this was the first half of week 2, I believe, and then we jumped into drawing insects, and this is where he started to explain the dynamic sketching method even more. So here's a good example. You look at the reference, you sketch just kind of these different shapes for placement, and then what you do in the next phase is you actually repeat the sketch from scratch, noting what mistakes you see. So, let's say I end up, let's see, I write here stronger angle for this, watch out for the planes, whatever placement or size issues, I make a mental note so that when I redraw, I draw it more accurately, start to add some details, and then in the third one, you repeat from scratch again, from what you learned from this sketch and what you learned from this sketch, and you add some detail. What makes this beautiful is through iteration, and because you're breaking it down into the simplest, smallest shape, you start to slowly retain the information. The more you repeat, you're sketching the same thing 3 times really quickly, focusing on the basic shapes without getting muddled in the details. Now you can play around with the forms. Now you can create things. Now you can memorize this sort of head and use it as the starting point for a creepy villain in a Marvel comic or whatever, right? Doing the same thing with butterflies. 1, 2, 3. Trying different positions. Not a fan of drawing bugs, to be honest, but I can see how this can be really amazing for creature design. And here I actually stopped sketching in the sketchbook because I did not like the roughness of this paper. This is the Tone Gray Strathmore. This is actually the recommended sketchbook for the class. But after I was done with this class, I got back to this sort of paper in another sketchbook, which I'll show. And I started to love it. I think it was just about me getting used to the pencil and the materials and sketching in this way, because I'm kind of used to that Watts Atelier long charcoal pencil. You know, it's held in a different way. It's you're kind of cutting and carving versus sketching. And it took a while to get used to the different materials. In any case, I stopped using the sketchbook and I converted to using printer paper, which also is one of the recommended materials for the class. And I like the smoothness of it. I was used to the smoothness of the charcoal and the smooth newsprint, but you'll see kind of me getting more comfortable here with the same exercises, trying to figure things out. These were, I believe, notes from the class that I took. Week 3, we started to play around with more subjects until the end of the semester. We were just kind of drawing different subjects. So for week 3, the topic was guns. You would take a look at different sorts of guns and break them down in 3 different viewpoints. The first being the side view. Again, using the dynamic sketching method. What are the simple shapes and placements? Start to add more detail, clarify some forms, and then go for the final sketch. So you'll see, like here, I'm noting, oh, okay, I might be off in the placement of the grip. This needs to be thinner. So you're taking all these notes and trying to fix your drawing. And then you go into what's called a 3/4 flat. I had trouble understanding this because I'm so used to eyeballing perspective, drawing from life, or even from references. What the 3/4 flattened perspective is imagine if you had a cube or whatever the hell this is in 3/4 perspective. So you'd expect these lines to go up as this is receding. But with the flattened view is what you do is you actually flatten these lines and kind of keep the illusion of a perspective. See if I can draw it better here. So you would actually flatten this line. You could see this effect if you take a camera and take a picture of something that's really far away, and then you zoom in digitally. The perspective effect gets really weakened. And the idea behind this is to remove the problem of perspective, so you're focusing just on the different placement, because taking perspective into account adds a whole nother layer. So this makes it simpler for you so that you can get to the next stage, which is starting to draw from perspective. This is drawing a Beretta. It's a really cool gun. You know, this class, I've never really looked into weapons, and this opened my eye to like kind of the design that goes behind it, the thought that goes behind it. Super interesting. This is me struggling with, again, the horizon line. I don't do well with these kind of rigid lines. When I start to eyeball things, it starts to get better, and I start to get things to look more accurate, actually. So this is the Mauser, and here you see the idea behind the 3/4 flattened perspective, helping me just think about placement, helping me think about proportions, basic form, without having to worry about perspective lines. And then as things go on, I start to get more comfortable with the method, with the repetition, the hand gets warm, And I'm able to get, I think, some pretty cool looking results, cool looking guns. We actually did the same method in that week on tools. So this is a staple gun, and something that I actually really enjoyed drawing was this chainsaw. Using a lot of the, especially here, I think it was this one? No, it was this one actually. I really started to use the add and subtract method, and here's where the full idea of dynamic sketching starts to pay off, because you start kind of thinking about the basic shapes and then you repeat, and that repetition helps you start to inject some of that information there. But instead of trying to work out this level of detail here, it's just let's work out the basic forms, let's work out the connections, let's work out the building blocks that put everything together. And then once we have something coherent, it doesn't even have to be accurate to the reference, it just has to communicate what it needs to communicate. And then when you add details, it's a lot easier. You're going through this phase another time, 1, 2, 3, and then you're adding the details on top. Next is week 4. This was an awesome week because we got to draw animals. So, and the way Peter breaks it down is a simple kind of balloon, stick, and then from that balloon and stick, you start to try to find the different locations, rib cage, hips, and then you can start to build a form from that, right? With like basic studies of anatomy and the bone structure. You're not trying to do this long study of the bones and the structure of the muscles. You're trying to find certain visual cues that will help you draw from the reference. And this is what's awesome. Like here is an example that Peter gave us from the class, which is if you start to sketch from life and you learn these basic blocks, then essentially if you want to draw a giraffe and you use kind of the balloon method, understand, okay, here's going to be where his shoulders is, here's going to be the attachment of the limbs, you've got a circle here and a circle here, and then you can just kind of memorize these basic forms as you start to sketch out your ideas, and then on top of them you start to add kind of these blocks and spheres and things like that, which makes memorizing everything a lot easier. And once you start to memorize a certain pattern, for example, cats, whether it's large cats or small cats, they follow the same overall structure, and you can start to play around with that, start to play around with engineering from imagination. I mean, look at how simple this is. And this is much more easier to memorize and play with rather than a full rendered drawing and trying to memorize it that way. Some more notes from the class, but then it's the same idea, flattened 3/4 perspective. This is where I actually started to try to invent from imagination, because it was all simple. I was trying to see what my brain was able to retain. And obviously, like Peter says, that this needs to be done a lot, consistently, repetition, mileage, for you to actually start to be able to retain that information. But even with just the 3-time repetition that he gave in his method, I would never be able to do this before, just impossible for me, even though I've drawn a lot, but I've never practiced this aspect, which obviously when you don't practice a specific aspect of your art form, you're going to be weak at it. And I'm very happy with how this one turned out. But you can see there's sort of remnants of understanding cats and how they work. And then this was me trying to play with imagination a bit more. And this is kind of how Peter would have kind of pushed the gesture of this a bit more. And, the way he described it is just play with this. Don't worry about the details and things. Let's work on this, get this to be animated and moving, then adding all the other stuff. So pushing the aliveness, pushing the movement, pushing the, kind of like how Disney animators kind of stretch. And I'm talking about old school Disney, design. I'm not sure what they're doing right now. I don't really watch Disney now. Their stuff honestly sucks nowadays. Same idea, just the different animals, 3/4 flattened, and then trying to work with some more animated views. This is me playing from imagination. Again, they're very terrible, but the fact that I started to be able to do this when it was a complete mystery to me after years of kind of classical training. And to be fair to Watts, they do kind of have drawing from, kind of figure invention stuff, but it's not really focused on. And, I don't want to make this video about kind of the deficiencies in the Watts curriculum. It's an excellent school. I highly recommend it, but no school is perfect, right? And this is one of the things that's missing in their curriculum, I believe, is the ability to really conjure this stuff up. See, even here, it's like about breaking down the form and really understanding, okay, where things connect into each other, how they flare, how does the form change its topography. Here's some monkeys. Here I remember Peter critiquing this for me, and before I started, I did not have kind of these values here and pushing them, and Peter started pushing me towards finding more graphic shapes. Alligators, the bears were fun to draw. Just trying to go through simple gesture, clarify some of the forms. Like it's a stick figure, right? Just to kind of understand, okay, there's a landmark over here where the bone connects, it connects here, boom, boom. Okay, this is the fat of his belly. Maybe I initially had it here, but it was wrong, so then I pushed it here, I don't remember. But, you're just keeping things simple. And then this is the third stage. Another one here, here's a beautiful example. Just a stick figure, major connections and forms, start to clarify things, and then the last stage. Well, the last stage here. Well, actually, this is awesome because I noticed that this was off. It's like, okay, draw it again. And just the iteration over and over and over helps. Kangaroos, all sorts of animals. A fun one, you've got the mother with her baby over here. Again, I wrote excellent here because I remember Peter saying that he really loved this drawing. This is kind of from imagination. And then I actually went to a local zoo to sketch. Let me grab my sketchbook. So the thing about drawing from a zoo, as I mentioned before, I've drawn from life human models in controlled situations. Now, even in a quick sketch situation, you have a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but the model in front of you has a static pose. And here, you sometimes get animals that are kind of lying around, lounging, sleeping, which is ideal. But most of the time they're moving. Even if they're lounging, they're not static. They're moving, they're moving their head. So you get to draw a part of the body, and then the head moves, and the way the head connects to the torso, starts to look messed up. So you really have to be quick, but this is where drawing animals that are moving helped me kind of exercise that imagination muscle. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. But you can see, I'm trying to capture this bear mid-move. And obviously he wasn't in this position for more than 1 second. And then it's like, okay, what do you remember? Try to capture it. And because you're thinking in that kind of circle, balloon, stick figure, it's easier to retain because this is what you're looking for. So, trying to draw different heads of a bear. I don't know what bird this was, but this one was fun to draw. Now, I feel bad for this tiger because he was kind of in a small cage and he was just pacing around. And as he's walking, you can kind of sort of get this to look okay as he's walking, but then the limbs are moving. And so you try to remember a specific moment. Let's say I capture this limb and I want to make the rest of it make sense with his gait. And it's like, okay, try to capture, because as he's walking, the moment he resembles something like this, you try to add. And then it's not quite, because, maybe he's at a different angle, so you try to use your imagination to fix things. And, obviously here, for example, this limb does not fit, right? Its proportion is off. But I'm really happy with how this turned out. I wouldn't be able to do this before. Just kind of the idea of sketching to learn quickly. And the idea that this line that you get from this 0.5 pencil, for example, is like, that's it. It's down. Figure it out. Fix it. Right? So committing to the line actually makes you kind of more accurate because you make so many mistakes that eventually you start to build this habit of, let me actually look at what I'm trying to draw here to get accurate lines. Alligator, lion. So yeah, these zoo drawings were fun. It's a couple hours. I was kind of a lazy session, just trying to see and not put pressure on myself and see if I can actually do this from life. I believe this is week 5, which is cars. Here we were kind of using the wheel as a measuring base, sort of like how you would use the head when you're measuring for the figure, which I get. Peter is trying to kind of teach you the basics, but I wasn't a fan of using the wheel to size things up. But nevertheless, it was a great lesson in using it for basic measurement, finding based on the wheel the basic shapes and where you want to fit things. And again, you use the side view, and then the flat 3/4, and then kind of a perspective view. Now with this one, we were focused on kind of drawing old and classic cars, 1920s, 1930s, 1960s. It was a lot of fun to see the designs. And here I'm kind of trying to cheat a little bit by transferring kind of my measurements. For example, this to this, I noticed some mistakes in my proportionality here. So when I fixed it over here and got some more details, the proper way of doing this method would be to resketch this. But I just ended up transferring the sizes just to make it quicker, which is, nothing wrong with that. But then you want your final one to kind of be bigger. It would have been better if I kind of drew a big car over here, because the idea is you want to use a few iterations, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the point of the iterations is to get an understanding. And then after you get an understanding, let's do something cool with what I learned, right? Again, more cards. You can see I started to play with values a little bit, with trying to play with graphic shapes. And these are all things that Peter talks about, right? This was the week where I actually started to feel a burnout. It's a lot of drawing, right? If you're committing to this class, you are going to work. I would say on average for me, I put in a 4-hour time block per day to just kind of work on this. This was... I don't know what week we're on now. I don't know if I skipped a week. I don't think I skipped a week. I may have messed it up, but doesn't matter. You get the kind of the point of the class. And this was my favorite week because this was figure drawing. I'm more comfortable with figure drawing. And so to kind of apply everything that I learned into figure drawing was really awesome to see. It was actually costume drawing, to be clear. It wasn't nude figure drawing. But still, that was kind of the area that I was more comfortable in. And, after taking some notes from the class, and it's like kind of basic, broken down understanding of how fabric works. Peter uses this kind of cool simplification. I learned more the kind of the classical 7-key folds, and that helped me a lot. But, watching this, this is easier to memorize than the 7-key folds, or trying to convert this into this is also easier. So basic kind of understanding of the human form. This is just notes from the class. Again, this was an example that Peter drew that I worked with. And this is something cool that he starts to talk about, is kind of the idea of the one-line design, right? So you design something just through one line as you move it around, and you create different sort of calligraphy because of that. And to me, my calligraphy is kind of weak with this tool. I think I have okay shape design, but the idea of pushing and pulling and using it kind of as an inking tool. So again, it's the 3-step method, right? Find the overall shapes and gesture, look for the tension points, and kind of add a little bit more of your understanding to things. And here, again, we go ahead and, it's like, okay, I want to break down this portion here because there's some things that I don't understand or that I want to practice, that I want to solve. And then once I have this step, go to the next step. So this is like a really, really great example of the dynamic sketching method, the way it works, the way you break things down. This class really helped me loosen up because, again, it's like the pen is just, you really have to commit to the lines. And having looser, more confident lines is better than accuracy. It just looks cool, and then you kind of fudge things around. And as your eye and hand start to hone in and work together in a better way, then you make less mistakes. I remember this was Peter's critique on mine, which is basically start to push more flow and animation. So that's definitely something that I want to work with, because I come from a more rigid kind of copy what you see. I don't want to say copy what you see, design what you see. I don't push a lot in the same way that animators push. So particularly when it comes to gesture, I kind of stiffen them up and things like that. But again, this is a beautiful way to understand the dynamic sketching method. First step, try to break down the basics. Second step, okay, I'm trying to find the flow, particularly of the clothing that the model was wearing. Okay, break down this area, find things out, figure things out. Again, notice it's so sketchy. It is so dirty. And even here, like, I have literal arrows just to help me understand, okay, that's where the flow is going from the tension point. And once I was comfortable with this, then I go to this. Now, this drawing probably could use another pass to unify some of the shapes. It's very spotty. But I really love this page because I think this is the page where the dynamic sketching method really started to click for me. Again, some Comic-Con references. Another one which really illustrates the method. One, basic shapes, placement, form, starting to figure out the flow of the clothes. And then you have the final drawing. I remember this was from a really cool website. I think I'll put it, I'll link it down below. It has a lot of beautiful references of costumed figures in Renaissance fairs and things like that. Really, really cool. Another Comic-Con one, Comic-Con. But you get the gist of the class. And let me show you the big takeaway that I got from it, which is, for me, the reason I took this class. Let me get my sketchbook. Just give me a second here. So the reason that I took this class was because I wanted to learn drawing from imagination, and also wanted to learn how to kind of see form in 3D space, work with references, but if I can't find the exact reference that I want, then being able to alter the reference so that I can just play, right? But it also opened up for me the idea of sketching really quickly. And here's an example. So this is actually a dragon from House of the Dragon. It doesn't look like a dragon. I wasn't trying to draw a dragon. I was just kind of trying to figure out, okay, what is the silhouette that I feel that I really like from it? Here's an example from a reference. I can't remember, probably something Warcraft or something like that. But here I'm just trying to figure out, okay, what is that strong silhouette and shape? So you can see it's super sketchy, and I wouldn't do this before because I came from a background of like every step should look beautiful, and that really held me back because any time a step did not look beautiful, I was like, oh, this is a shitty drawing. And now my mentality is, I don't care if it's a shitty drawing, I want to see what I can pull out of it and learn. So I'm trying to pull these silhouettes. This is a drawing from imagination completely. Drain eye drawing. But this figure, it's messed up, it's not, proportionally correct, but starting to actually play around with this, I would never be able to do, right? This was drawn from imagination. This was drawn from imagination. Again, never able to do it. I'm not saying it's a good drawing, even, this kind of thing that kind of looks like a wolf. Imagination. Never able to do this, as ugly as it was. Again here, I'm studying the silhouette, I'm studying the shapes, I'm studying the flow and the design, rather than trying to make a good drawing, because I'm trying to retain what are the things that I think visually look cool. This was also done from imagination. The figure isn't that great, but I think, starting to see drapery from imagination, whether or not this is accurate, again, is besides the point. These are some drawings from the Art of Warcraft, I believe. Art of Warcraft. And, this kind of night Elfie drawing, it was so quick for me to draw. Again, something that this method helped me with is speed. You know, just kind of sketching quickly. I was so much slower because I was always kind of freaking out about mistakes and erasing with a pencil and getting things accurately. And with this, it's just like, you know, just draw the thing, you know, just get the lines. And if it's wrong, adapt, figure it out, fix it. This is a really great example of what I'm talking about here. This, I believe, is supposed to be Maev's Shadow Song from the Warcraft universe. And obviously this looks nothing like Maeve. I have the silhouette kind of, and that's what I was trying to study. But remember, I got this head in the wrong position. It was looking the wrong way, and it's supposed to be moved in this direction a little bit more. You know, I messed up the features a little bit, and I was like, okay, I can't fix this. So I was like, okay, how can I turn it into a character that might fit into a children's book or something like that? And it looks like that, and that's where the mistakes come in, because the mistakes and the adapting forces you to think in a much more imaginative way. I mean, this is another example that I love. Again, not the greatest drawing or whatever this creature is, but I tried to, I mean, this started as a figure. This reference was a nude figure, I believe. Messed up the torso, and then I was like, okay, let's play with this. Let's see what happens. And then somehow a weird version of an ostrich came out, extremely gigantic legs. This is probably inaccurate, but I started to play with it and turn it into a creature. This was impossible for me before this class. And I don't want to say that this class is going to teach you how to draw from imagination, because that's not the focus of the class at all. I'm just going to say how it affected me. You might be a beginner, and this will just help you learn how to draw. Basic drawing, basic sketching. But for me, it improved my speed, it relaxed me around mistakes, and you know, these are more sketches from Warcraft. You know, again, this is kind of clunky. Because you make mistakes, it's like, oh shit, you know, now the proportions are out of whack. He's kind of stiff. Not a fan of my cross-hatching over here. But here again, this is an orc. Got the head wrong, got a bit of the pieces wrong, and it's like, okay, adapt them, fix them, work with them. Can you create something different out of them? And again, I want to reiterate the speed that this gave me. I mean, I just became much faster at sketching, which that in and of itself, if you want to start to retain information, then the more you can sketch something really quickly, the more repetition you have, the faster you are at retaining the information that you want to retain. You know, and it can go even simpler, right? Because I remember Peter was kind of breaking down. There was a reference of a figure, and it was like a clothed figure, and she had this amazing silhouette, which, you know, head, and then you have this kind of cone design, and then the clothes would flare out and just go like that, right? You know, he ignored all the figure that was here and just focused on the overall silhouette. And it's like, that's what I want to remember. That's what I want to play around with. Yes, sometimes you want to, you know, remember all the stuff that's related to construction. Like if I wanted to draw a head, you know, kind of remember the rule of thirds and all that stuff. So you can kind of push and pull how far back or forward, or the intensity of the information that you want to retain. And the more that you build up on it, the easier it becomes. So hope you guys got something out of this. Again, you know, as far as recommendations for this class, I would recommend you take it. If you're an absolute beginner and you've never drawn before, it might be a bit of a jump. Spend some time kind of learning the basics, like the ability to see shape and the ability to see basic proportion, basic understanding of negative shape and forms and things like that. Again, nothing complex, and then you can jump into this class. If you're kind of intermediate, kind of like how I think of myself, again, you know, I spoke about how it benefited me. If you're more advanced, then again, you're going to learn more about design and things like that, because the way Peter breaks down his feedback is based on your level. Where you're at, he's going to match you. And you can ask lessons, you can ask questions in the lessons, and, you know, he goes out of his way to explain things. The drawbacks from this class is the time. You know, it's advertised as a 3-hour class. It never was. I think the shortest class was 4 hours and a half. Expect 5-hour marathons. You know, someone like me who runs a tight schedule, I signed up kind of with the belief of a 3-hour class, and kind of things went out of whack there. But you know, all the classes are recorded, so most of my schedule, I ended up just watching the recorded classes. And even if you can't attend the classes live, you can ask questions on the Discord and he will answer them. It's always better to attend live because, you know, you can have more of a back and forth with Peter. But if the time zone doesn't fit you, or a 4 or 5 hour, 6-hour marathon doesn't fit you, then, you know, it worked for me and I have a tight schedule, right? And, you know, Peter does go on a lot of tangents. So, you know, if a student doesn't bring him back on point, it might take a while. Like one of the classes, I remember we spent an hour talking about something specific pertaining to what the students were worried about. We didn't even start the demo. And to me, like as an older gentleman, it's like, let's get to the class, dude. You know, we can discuss this stuff, but like we can do that stuff later. You know, I would actually prefer if Peter on his class, on his website makes it very clear that it's not 3 hours. It's just not 3 hours, dude. So that was one of the negatives. You know, the time and kind of the tangents, the tangential discussions. Other than that, honestly, it was a great class. Peter is a really, really great teacher. He takes his time, he explains things. And you know, he's dealing with a range of students from different ages. You know, the 21 shy, you know, 21-year-old who's shy and socially awkward, all the way to like the professional artist or whatever, right? Everything in between. And he deals with everyone with grace and you know, professionalism, and meeting everyone where they're at, and just being a genuinely kind spirit. Plus the fact that he breaks down things in a really beautiful way. So I would recommend the class to everyone, really. Next step for me will be to take the dynamic figure class. I already signed up for it. That I'm excited about. That I'm really excited about. My favorite thing is drawing figures. And so I'll be posting videos about that. I'll see if I can document the journey week by week, so that you guys can, you know, I can kind of dive deeper into what we're doing in these videos and things like that. And if you enjoy this content, give a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.